Yo, 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 what is up, y'all? It's Cone back here again tonight with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. As we are heading into the last 10 games of the season, every game matters, whether it's going for playoff seeding, trying to stay in the play-in tournament, things like that. Every single game matters, and so we had a lot of games tonight that had big implications. One maybe more than the rest in terms of kind of one of the narratives on the season. The Los Angeles Lakers losing to the New Orleans Pelicans tonight, which is not a new thing. The Lakers have been losing all season, but in this one they were leading by 23 points, up 20 at halftime, lost by 8 to the Pelicans after being outscored 16 in the third quarter and then 12 in the fourth. It was just kind of another loss on what has been a really bad Lakers season, but this one in particular is really rock bottom for the Lakers, which I know I've said on here probably 30 times at this point that they've hit a new low. But it's really kind of stacking up when you take a look at the standings out in the NBA Western Conference. So a few days ago, I was looking at the standings and I was thinking to myself, like, kind of just thinking, like, what games do I need to look out for and stuff like that. And I noticed the Spurs were only like a game and a half behind the Lakers for that play-in spot, right behind them. And I was like, oh, let me look at their schedules. The Lakers have a really, really hard schedule, and the Spurs schedule is not that bad. And after tonight's loss to the Pelicans, not only do the Pelicans now own the tiebreaker over the Lakers over the course of the season series? So if the Lakers and Pelicans are tied, the Lakers are going to move down the play-in tournament standings, but the Spurs now are only one game back of the Lakers for taking their play-in spot. The Lakers might not even make the play-in tournament at this point. And I think that's kind of absurd because we all knew that the Lakers weren't going to make the playoffs like outright. They were going to have to make it through the play-in tournament, but they might not even get there. Also part of this whole equation, LeBron James sprained his ankle, at least it looked like he did, in tonight's game. And as someone who sprained his ankle 2 days ago and has done it a lot of times because apparently I have super flimsy ankles, that's not an easy injury. Now, of course, I'm not LeBron James. I'm not a superhuman, so I'm sure he can try and play through it. He did in the second half, but it looked pretty bad. Like his ankle is fully sideways and things like that. So if LeBron misses any time, even if he doesn't miss time, the Lakers are probably not going to even make the play-in tournament. So let's look at their schedule. The Lakers coming up, their schedule after tonight's Pelicans game, they face the Mavericks, Jazz, Pelicans again, Nuggets, Suns, Warriors, Thunder, and Nuggets to finish out the season. All in all, there's probably one win in there that I would say is mostly guaranteed. It's probably the Thunder game, because even though we've beaten them a couple times this season, Shea might not play. He might not be playing the rest of the season with an ankle injury. Giddey's out for the year. Dort's out. I don't think we beat them unless they hit another low. But that, like the Nuggets are a playoff team. The Suns are the best team in the NBA. The Warriors are one of the best teams in the NBA. The Nuggets again. The Jazz and Mavericks are the 4 and 5. They have a ridiculous schedule to close out this stretch. And then if we look over at the Spurs schedule, the Spurs have the Rockets, the Trailblazers twice, so that's 3 wins I would say they probably get guaranteed. They do face the Grizzlies, but then they have like the Nuggets, Timberwolves, Warriors, and Mavs, which are hard games, but they have at least 3 guaranteed wins there, assuming none of those teams rest their players towards the end of the season. So that's 3 guaranteed wins for the Spurs, and the Lakers, who are only a game ahead of them, have like 1 game that I would say with confidence I think they'll win. They also have that Pelicans game, but they just lost to the Pelicans, who were down 23 in this one, and LeBron James scored almost 40 points. And it didn't matter. They still lost. So this Lakers team, unless Anthony Davis is coming back to save them, they might not even make the play-in tournament. And that's part of what makes this game so bad. This was one of like 3 games that they had that I could see as like genuine opportunities to have a good chance to win and secure your spot in the play-in tournament. Maybe it's better in the long run, honestly, if they don't make the playoffs, let LeBron rest, give AD time to come back. So honestly, maybe that's better. But in terms of trying to make some late season playoff push with AD coming back, maybe you get healthy and you try and just see if you can put this thing together at the last minute. This game was super critical for them. This was one of the most important games of their season, not just to keep like ground on the Spurs, but the Pelicans are one of those teams they're fighting with right now for their playoff lives, and they lost to them in embarrassing fashion. They were up 20 at halftime, and I foolishly was like, oh, they've probably got this. LeBron's kind of going off right now. So I went and got dinner, came back. It was a tie game with like 6 minutes left, and then the Pelicans just didn't look back. So another new rock bottom for the Los Angeles Lakers. Honestly, it's probably better for them at this point to just make the lottery, go out, get a lottery pick, bring in a new young guy on a cheap contract to bring into this team because they desperately need both youth and players on cheap contracts that are actually good. They don't have a lot of youth or cheap contract good players at this point in time on their roster. So honestly, the lottery is probably a better outcome for them. If they make the playoffs through the play-in anyways, they're going to get swept by the Phoenix Suns. It won't even be close. So probably they might even want to be in the lottery in the long run. So maybe LeBron James just sits out for the rest of the season with this ankle injury. Not saying it's like a phantom injury or anything, but it might just be better to rest him at this point. So let the Spurs take the play-in spot, just kind of go into the offseason, reevaluate things, get that lottery pick, and see where you go next year. But it's kind of just, honestly, at this point, it's impressive the way that the Lakers continue to find new ways to hit rock bottom. Something kind of funny that I was thinking about earlier is that I predicted the Lakers to win the championship this season at the beginning of the year, which was probably a lot of bias, but also I just really thought the Lakers had a good offseason. Bringing in Russ, I thought he would help kind of elevate them when LeBron and AD missed time, which has not been the case. I didn't expect AD to miss this much of the season. But I really thought they had a shot to win the championship, and now the fact that they might not even make the play-in tournament, it's kind of absurd, and it's kind of crazy. It really speaks to how this Lakers team is one of the most disappointing teams of my lifetime. I'm not sure about NBA history. I'm not an NBA historian or anything like that. I'm only 21 years old, so I haven't been on this planet a super long time, but at least in the time that I've been watching basketball, there are not many teams that I can think of that were more hyped like the Lakers were and completely fell off. Had one of the worst seasons in terms of hype probably ever. It's not been great. With this loss, they fall to 12 games under 500, which is an absurd sentence to say. I really don't know what else to say about this. Let me know what you think about the Lakers. Someone brought up the point that maybe I curse them. If you don't know, on this channel, whenever I talk positively about a team, they seem to start playing bad, and when I talk negatively, they play positive. It's kind of like this reverse effect. So at the beginning of the season, maybe I cursed them when I said that they were going to win the championship, something like that. And if that is the case, Lakers fans, I'm sorry, but also I'm apologizing to myself because I really wanted to see Russ get a ring, and that's just not going to happen. So the Lakers keep finding ways to hit new rock bottom. If I had to make a prediction, I don't think they make the play-in. I think LeBron's going to miss some time with this ankle injury, and even if he doesn't, he's not going to quite be himself. They've got a really hard schedule. The Spurs have an easier one, and they're just going to end up falling out of the whole thing. Go into the offseason, rest up, and just bring in a lottery pick, and I guess try and figure it out next season. Once again, I don't know what they're going to do in the offseason, but whatever. In terms of the Pelicans, shout out to Trey Murphy, who had a really solid game as a rookie. Brandon Ingram had 26, 7, and 5, 19 and 12 from Jonas Valanciunas. So shout out to those guys as the Pelicans stay alive in the play-in tournament. Moving on from that one, the Phoenix Suns played the 76ers tonight in a game that could potentially be a finals preview. The Suns end up pulling it out 114 to 104. It was really close right up until the end when the Suns did their typical, all right, we're kind of bored with this whole thing, we're just going to go off in crunch time, whole maneuver that they always do, just completely outplaying the Sixers down the stretch. James Harden was weirdly passive in this one. He only had 14 points. He didn't hit a single two-pointer. He was kind of just like, it was weird. Like, no one seemed to want to shoot other than Joel Embiid at the end of the game. Embiid had a monster game with 37, 15, and 3. He was phenomenal. 17 and 8 from Tobias Harris, who had a pretty solid game. 18 from Tyrese Maxey, who had a really solid second half. His first half was not great, but overall, it was just the bench. They had 6 points from Green, 2 from Niang, 3 from Shake Milton, 4 from DeAndre Jordan. Like, not much production there. And when you only get 14 from James Harden, that's just not enough off your bench, especially against a Phoenix Suns team that is super deep. Devin Booker had 35, Chris Paul had 19 and 14, 14 and 12 from DeAndre Ayton. It was just a complete, it's what the Suns have been doing all season. They've been against these really good teams. It'll be crunch time, combine those two words. In clutch time, they'll kind of just go off. They'll kind of just take over. And the Suns right now, I don't know how a team is going to beat this team in 4 games or beat them 4 out of 7 games at this point. Fun fact, when Chris Paul missed that time, the Suns only lost 4 games in total. I think he was out for like 14 or 16 games. They only lost 4 games in total without Chris Paul. They're on an 8-game win streak right now. I don't know how you beat this team 4 out of 7 games, but I guess that's for another team to figure out, not me. Moving on from that one, the Mavericks and Jazz played in what was a super critical game for playoff seeding. The Mavericks win 114 to 100, and they're now the 4 seed in the West, which is really impressive from them. Luka Doncic with 32, 10, and 5, 23 from Reggie Bullock, who had a great game, 22, 10, and 5 from Jalen Brunson, 12 from Dinwiddie. The Jazz were without Rudy Gobert in this one. Donovan Mitchell only had 12 points. He went out with an injury for a little bit, I believe, if I remember correctly. 14 and 7 from Mike Conley, 14 from Clarkson, 18 from Rudy Gay. Just not a lot of offense to go around in this one. And as we've seen all season, without Gobert on the floor, the Jazz really aren't able to stop many teams, and that was super evident tonight. The Boston Celtics played the Timberwolves. I'm not going to go over that one because the Celtics kind of just dominated. But something that's interesting is the Celtics are now the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference after what was a really mediocre start to their season. I still can't believe the way that they've turned this thing around. It's seriously one of the most impressive second halves of a season I've ever seen from a team, especially when you consider where they were at the first half. Ime Udoka definitely deserves some Coach of the Year hype. Personally, for me, I think it has to be Monty Williams, but Udoka is deserving of some of that credit. I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes top 5 in that race, so shout out to him. And finally, the Charlotte Hornets beat the Brooklyn Nets in what was... I didn't even really realize how close this was in terms of seeding. With this win, the Hornets have leapfrogged the Nets to be in that 7-8 play-in game rather than the 9-10 one. So right now, the Brooklyn Nets would face the Atlanta Hawks if the season ended today in that 9-10 play-in game, which is huge for both the Hornets and the Nets. The Hornets, they really need to try and be in that first game. You don't want to have to win the 2 games to get in. Winning that 1 game would be so much easier for the Charlotte Hornets, especially probably going up against the Cleveland Cavaliers team that's pretty beat up at this point, missing Jared Allen. Of course, they've had injuries to Ricky Rubio over the course of the season. Just, they feel very beat up at this moment, so I'm sure the Hornets would rather face them than have to face like the Hawks and then the winner or the loser of that game if they were to fall back down. And for the Brooklyn Nets, having to play 2 games to win in is kind of scary in single elimination format. The Hawks aren't a pushover with Trae Young, and of course, then you might have to play one of the Hornets or the Cavaliers, who are both tough teams to play if you do even win that game. So this was a big game, the Hornets getting this win. LaMelo Ball with 33, 7, and 9, hit a ton of 3-pointers in this one. He had 7, I think, in the third quarter, or maybe fourth quarter, one of those two. So he had a phenomenal game, 18 from PJ Washington, 24 from Miles Bridges. They've just really been on a roll recently. They went from like really good to just kind of fell off a cliff, and now they're back to being really good. So good time to pick in terms of going towards the playoffs for momentum. For the Nets, Kyrie Irving playing in his first home game really struggled with only 16 points, 27 for Kevin Durant, 20 and 17 for Drummond, as the Hornets continue to get punished for their lack of like a real center. But the Nets really just couldn't put it together in this one. So shout out to the Hornets getting a really big win and continuing to try and make a push to maybe make it out of the play-in tournament if they stay hot, or at least stay in that 7-8 matchup. So those are my thoughts on the games today. There were some other ones. The Wizards beat the Warriors, for example, but a lot of blowouts and stuff that doesn't mean a ton right now. So that's all my thoughts on the games for today. Let me know what your biggest takeaways were. What do you think about the whole Lakers situation? Make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I will see you all later. Real One, say it back.